Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and I'm here today at the Springfield Armory National Historic Site. We're taking a look at some of the weird German prototypes in their reference collection. Of course, Springfield Armory was the site of a lot of the testing and evaluation of captured foreign weapons during and after World War II, and so they have a bunch of weird German World War II stuff, a lot of late war German World War II stuff here. And today we are taking a look at Henel's simplified Sturmgewehr. Now, the Germans, of course, by late in the war were in production of the MP43/MP44/STG-44, the Sturmgewehr. I'll use it as just a general term. And this was a good gun. They had issues supplying enough ammunition for it, and they also had a lot of quality control issues producing Sturmgewehrs. It was relatively cheap compared to some of the other stuff that the German military was using, but it still wasn't simple to produce. And in December of 1944, so very late in the war, the Henel Company was allowed to submit a simplified version of the Sturmgewehr that would use essentially the same action, the same mechanical action, but simplified stampings and a much reduced manufacturing cost. And they did that, and we have this one remaining example. This is the only one that anyone knows of anywhere in the world. So the idea was, we'll keep the handling the same, we'll keep the controls the same, we'll keep the sights the same. We just want to make it quicker and easier to manufacture. And frankly, Henel, having looked at this now, Henel did a pretty impressive job of simplifying this thing into something that would be a lot easier to manufacture. So let's just dive right in and take a closer look and compare it to the original. So the idea here was to retain as much as possible of the handling of the standard Sturmgewehr while reducing the production cost. So the magazines are exactly the same, uses standard Sturmgewehr magazines. The controls are all the same, although they're on the other side. I do want to point out, unfortunately, there's a metal tab on the top of this pistol grip that goes into a slot here, and it's broken off at some point in the past 70 years. So this pistol grip is going to be kind of floppy through the whole video. That's what's going on there. So if we start by taking a look at the controls here, we have a cross bolt, cross receiver push button that is semi-auto to full auto. Sorry, there's that pistol grip flopping around. And then we have a safety selector here that is safe and fire. These controls aren't quite in the exact same orientation to each other as they were on the original gun. So here's the original. You can see this one goes from horizontal to about 45 degrees up, where on the original it goes from horizontal to like 70 degrees down. But the selector switch is the same on the originals. We have a magazine release button on the original. We have the release button in the same place right here on the simplified Henel gun. Now what's interesting though is they have a slightly different mechanism for the magazine catch spring. Instead of a coil spring inside the receiver there, we have a flat spring right here along the side of the receiver. And when I push this release button in, all it's doing is just bending this long flat spring out. This is actually the exact same style of magazine release that was in the early VG-15 rifles. So that allows me to take the mag out. The charging handle is on the left side of the gun, which is the same as the original Sturmgewehr, which has its charging handle on the left. The original one's a little bit higher on the gun than this is, but not really a big deal. The sights are exactly the same, goes out to 800 meters. I'm sure it's actually exactly the same rear sight components as on the standard gun. There'd be no reason to change that. The front sight is also the same. You can see it's got a slot there for a front sight hood, although the hood is missing on this example. Now, on the original Sturmgewehrs, after the MKB-42s, the gas block here marks the end of the gas tube. And, well, as you can see here, you've got the gas block, and then the tube ends, there's a stacking rod here on top and the barrel on the bottom. Henel, I think in simplifying the gun, realized it was cheaper to just make the gas tube longer and use it to mount the front sight than it would be to cut it down and then have to make a separate front sight block to elevate the front sight to its correct elevation out there. So we have barrel on the bottom, gas tube up here that just functions as a front sight mount. All right, now we get into the stuff that really changed. Our disassembly is with a locking catch up here instead of the stock coming off. So I pull this in, and then the gun is going to pivot open, very much like an AR. The recoil spring has been moved to the top of the receiver. It's right up here. On the original Sturmgewehrs, it goes down into the stock. Up on this one, this spring is going to expand quite a lot. There we go. So we have a very simple stamped, basically stamped, folded, a little bit of welding, flat guide rod there. We have a recoil spring. It's not the same as the Sturmgewehr spring. It's a little smaller in diameter in order to fit into the top side of the upper receiver. And then we don't actually really have guide rails for the bolt and bolt carrier. Instead, they ride in the gap between the upper and lower receivers. So if we open this up, we have our bolt carrier assembly here, and it's just sliding on the bottom of the upper receiver. It's got a couple of rails, folded rails built into the carrier itself. And they're just going to run in between this surface and this surface down here. So this comes out easily enough. We just pull it out the back of the gun. All right, for comparison's sake, we have our Haenel bolt and carrier assembly up here, and we have a standard Sturmgewehr set down here. And man, Haenel, I'm really impressed with what they did. They really simplified this. So on the original, you have a fairly complex forging here as essentially the bolt carrier component. We've got a big hook up here, and that interfaces with this hook on the bolt. So this is a tilting bolt gun. It's locked in battery in this position. When the carrier comes back, those two hooks interact and they pull the bolt up out of lock and then cycle. What Haenel has done is it has replaced that forged element with a really simple U-shaped piece of stamped sheet metal. The charging handle is integral to it, just comes out one side. And then our bolt is now a square profile bolt instead of being basically a round profile bolt. So you can imagine the reduced machine time to make this much, much simpler cut. So you can see they've got the ejector slot right on the bottom, easy to jig this up, easy to fixture it, put that in correctly. On the original Sturmgewehr, it's off there at an angle, it's bigger, requires removing more material. These are both have their firing pins missing, by the way. But what's most interesting to me here is to replace this hook on the stamped bolt carrier. They just kind of add another stamping step and squished that thing down to where it now functions as a hook. So we've got a hook on the back of the bolt, and you can see it interfacing right there. When the bolt carrier comes back, that stamped slope in the carrier is going to grab the hook and pull the bolt up out of battery so the whole thing can cycle. Then instead of having to drill a precise hole, put this in, and then fit the charging handle to lock the piston in place, nope, we're going to thread the end of the gas piston, run it through one little flat piece, and put a pair of nuts on it to lock it in place. Much simpler. They've gotten rid of much of the complexity at the front end of the gas piston as well. All right, and then one other really interesting element. The firing pin, of course, sits in the bolt itself. Like I said, they're missing from these, but you need a way for the hammer to actually hit the firing pin, and that's why you have this open slot in the Sturmgewehr. Very similar to the open slot in the AR-15 bolt carrier, by the way. This is the place where the hammer can pivot up and swing up like this, and it hits this transfer pin right in there, that guy. That goes forward, and then that end of the transfer pin is going to hit the back of the firing pin and fire it. In order to simplify that, Haenel added this sort of M-shaped spacer block. This is their transfer bar right here. It's just a rectangular piece of steel. The center pin right there, that guy, controls how far forward and back this can go. So that's your firing pin transfer bar right there. Like, really pretty easy. All right, now if we go back to the receiver, we can take a look at the upper receiver here. It's very simple. There's really nothing going on in it. The recoil spring lives right right there in the top of the upper receiver. The lower receiver is all square. There's no separate grip assembly anymore. Instead, the pistol grip is riveted, the front of the trigger guard's riveted on, and then it's supposed to have this little metal fin that locks into a slot. That slot right there, but it broke at some point, unfortunately. But instead of having to have this whole separate stamping for the grip assembly, like they've just bypassed all of that. They've got a very simple square upper, and they've got a very simple square lower as well. Now, there's a pin here that I have already taken out. That pin holds this plate in place, and that just covers the fire control elements. I can just pull this out. There's a bunch of very old grease on the bottom, but that's just a cover plate. As far as I can tell, they've reused the same hammer, sear, and hammer spring, although some of these other small parts are a little different. The selector's a little farther back from the sear, so this connecting bar is a little bit different, but basically the complicated parts they've left alone. Like those are already in production, easier to leave them alone than to try and redesign them. The back end here, it's interesting, it appears they're basically using standard buttstocks. There we go. Because there's still a hole in the buttstock for the recoil spring. If you recall, on the original Sturmgewehrs, the recoil spring goes down into that hole in the buttstock, and they've still got that hole up here, and it frankly looks like they're using basically the same buttstock end cap there and just sliding the whole thing into the back of their square receiver. Again, parts that are already in production, cheaper to keep using them than to redesign something that's only a little bit simpler. The working bits up here, however, are very much simpler. So here's your ejector sitting in the very center. This is the locking block. So the bolt now locks in the same place. It's these two shiny surfaces right there. But now that is very simply positioned like that. So this is the bolt in the locked position. That piece right there is the locking block. It's easy to get in and out. On the original Sturmgewehrs, that locking block is up inside here, and essentially the receiver gets stamped and riveted around it. So once it's in place there, it's really pretty hard to work on. With Haenel's design, that is very easily accessible. There's maybe a little bit better visual of the fire control group. It's a little hard to see down in there too much. But there you go. There is Haenel's cheaper, easier, simpler version of the Sturmgewehr that they don't appear to have ever actually gotten finished. Now, I'm sure you're wondering, how well did this actually work? And the answer is, we have no idea. So the US Army occupied the Haenel factory on April 3rd, 1945. We don't have a specific record confirming it, but that is most likely when this gun came into US possession. It was probably captured at the factory. There are no known German trials records of this, probably because Haenel didn't actually have it finished and never submitted it to the Wehrmacht or to any other element of the German military to actually get tested before the factory was occupied and eventually the war was over. So we don't know how it shot. Aberdeen Proving Grounds doesn't appear to have done any formal testing of it. I suspect someone around the arsenal probably did some shooting with it at some point. It appears to be functional, but there's no known American trials report on the gun either. So we just don't know. I would say from looking at it, I bet this would have been pretty functional and effective. There are some places where its service life might have been a bit lighter. Things like that unlocking hook in the bolt carrier would have had to be heat treated kind of just right to avoid deforming or cracking under extended use. But other than a few issues like that, I think this could have been a really good thing. It's really obvious just how much simpler its stampings and construction elements are than the Sturmgewehr as Germany actually produced it. So really cool to get a chance to take a look at this. As I said, it's a one-of-a-kind, the only known gun of this model anywhere. And currently it lives in the reference collection here at the Springfield Armory National Historic Site. So I'd like to give them a big thank you for letting me come in and pull this out and take it apart and show it to you guys. if you find yourself in Springfield, they have a pretty darn cool museum of small arms open to the public here with a bunch of experimental stuff from US military development. Lots of cool pieces. Definitely worth your time to check out the museum here. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.